Okay, one question. Have you guys ever seen a man hit himself in the nuts? What is going on, guys? So today we are back with another video diving deeper into the Jungle Cup, and today we're actually going to be looking at a Pokemon that you guys have requested so much in the last week. It literally drove this Pokemon straight to the top of the charts. But we're actually going to be taking a look at Girafarig, which is a normal and psychic type Pokemon, maxing out at level 40 with 15s across the board. You do hit 2046, which is a pretty respectable CP for the Great League here. Now with a 0 on attack, 15 defense, 12 stamina, at level 28 you do hit that 1500 clean, which is awesome. Then we do have a 73 in bulk and 57th in stat product. Of course those do come from my spreadsheet and my numbers, and that's fairly respectable. Out of roughly 200 Pokemon in the cup, that's you know, above half. That's almost pushing like the top third of the Pokemon on both numbers there. But of course all of this does come from our base stats here with a 182 on attack, 133 defense, and 172 on our stamina. The top half is definitely looking pretty good, but let's look at the bottom half and see what we've got going on in our moves here. So we do have only 5 moves to choose from, and out of these moves there's some interesting ones to say the least. So the fact that we're a normal and psychic type Pokemon really does bring up an interesting typing that we don't usually see in a lot of matches here, but basically the normal typing is going to have a weakness to the fighting typing, which is actually the only weakness that it carries. And then psychic is actually going to resist a little bit of that fighting damage, so what ends up happening is the fighting type damage that we receive from counter, break, close combat, whatever like fighting type moves you kind of encounter along the way of your journey here are going to be neutral damage, which actually poses a really interesting thing, because any help that we can get resisting some of that counter damage up against Vigoroth will definitely help in trying to actually cancel out the opponent's Vigoroth itself. So let's actually take a look at what moves we're actually rocking here today. So we've got Tackle for 2 energy, we get 3 damage. After stab it does get bumped up to 3.6. We do run with Confusion, which is always good to see. 3 energy per turn for 4 damage per turn. After stab it does get bumped up to 4.8. So in terms of fast moves, Confusion is just objectively better here. So we've got better energy gains, we've got better damage. There's just not a whole lot of reason to run Tackle over Confusion at this point. It just makes a lot more sense to just go with Confusion here. Moving on to our charge moves though, we do have Psychic, Thunderbolt, and Mirror Coat. Now, here's an interesting thing. PvPoke seems to really like Mirror Coat, and I guess it's okay if you're going for speed, but it's just so horrible on efficiency. So for 55 energy we get 60 damage at 1.09. After stab it gets bumped up to 72 for a 1.31. 1.31 on our efficiency is really crappy. So I'm not a huge fan of Mirror Coat. I do kind of see a world where having both Thunderbolt and Mirror Coat could keep the opponent guessing, because they both do cost the exact same energy. Maybe they don't know which one's coming out, they don't know which one you're trying to bait with or possibly even punish with. Kind of like in that scenario, I could see that going really well. But from what I've seen, Psychic seems to just be 1, way more efficient, and 2, it actually helps carry us a little bit further in terms of matchups up against the meta in the 1v1 shield scenario. Granted, it's only one more matchup, but still, I mean, that's one more matchup that we win rather than lose because of Mirror Coat. Just a thought there. So with Psychic here, we do have 70 energy for 100 damage at a 1.43. After stab, it does get bumped up to the 120 on the damage for a 1.71 on the damage per energy ratio there. And Thunderbolt here is 55 energy for 90 damage at a 1.64. Of course, we do not carry that electric typing, so we do not get stabbed from Thunderbolt. But, so like I said, for Psychic and Mirror Coat, I can see benefits to running either or. Personally, I like having Psychic as the more efficient move. If you only ever use Thunderbolt and the opponent is aware that Thunderbolt and Mirror Coat are the same, until you whip out the Psychic, they're never gonna know that either way. So You could possibly get away with running either one. I personally feel like Psychic would be a little bit better in this scenario, but that's just me. Of course, it's up to you to have whatever move you want for your team. So for the rest of this video, we are going to focus more on Confusion, Psychic, and Thunderbolt as our moveset here. And let's actually look into some shielding scenarios. In our 0 versus 0 up against the entire cup, we actually end up with a 28.4%, which isn't looking too hot. Next, we move into our 2 versus 0, which is where I have 2 shields, my opponent doesn't have any shields. We actually end up with an 86.6%. Interestingly, in this scenario, since we have complete shield advantage, I'm actually looking for the Pokemon that we do horrible up against. The Pokemon that can still end up beating us if we have complete shield advantage are quite important. And a lot of those Pokemon are the grass types, which makes a little bit of sense. A lot of the grass types do have a role in taking out the normal types this month, which does set us up for a pretty big punish in terms of the grass types going up against our Girafarig. Interestingly though, in the next shield scenario, we do have the 0 versus 2, which is where now my opponent has both shields, but I don't have any. We only actually end up winning 4.5% of these matchups. And a lot of things that show up here are grass types. But that's not the important part. The important part is that they're actually poison types. Because the poison typing is going to carry a weakness to the psychic type moves, Confusion actually puts up a ton of damage here and allows us to really penetrate a lot of the grass types that also carry the poison typing as well. There are a couple of bugs sprinkled in there as well, like just with general like poison type bugs as well. But generally, the poison type Pokemon that are also running around in the cup, like Venusaur, Ivysaur, Victreebel, things like that, also have a hard time coming over the Girafarig because they do have that weakness to Confusion, and because Confusion is just insanely hard hitting anyways. Our last shield scenario up against the entire cup is the 2 versus 2, which is where I have both shields, my opponent has both shields. We actually end up with a 53.7% here, which is pretty decent. So the problem that I can foresee here is that when we don't have any shields whatsoever, we do horrible. 28.4% is really, really low. That possibly could be the lowest one that we've seen all month. I don't remember. Kangaskhan, just for reference, was 25.4, so it was just a tad bit weaker. I'm trying to look for Miltank here. Miltank. Oh wow, even Miltank in the 0 versus 0 was a 50%. Okay, so Girafarig definitely not the lowest number that we've seen, but still quite a low number anyways. That's kind of an interesting point. Whenever we don't have shields, we're actually it's gonna be a really hard uphill battle. But statistically, if we do open with Girafarig, we will win 53.7% of those matchups. Conversely though, if we close, we do win 28.4%. So definitely gonna have to say that Girafarig is definitely an opening type Pokemon more than anything. And honestly, like, if you think about some of the more common openers, I don't know, it could be an interesting lead. It could be a surprising lead, to say the least. So to actually check out what we're going to be doing with Girafarig today, let's actually dive a little bit deeper into these shield scenarios. Up against the entire cup, we're going to give ourselves one shield here. We're going to give our opponent one shield. You can see in PvPoke, we do have Confusion, Psychic, Thunderbolt, just like we talked about. And up against the entire Jungle Cup, one shield, one shield. If we hit battle, you can see in the 1v1s for the entire cup, we do actually end up winning only 32.8. So while that is still rather low, it is in line with how our shield scenarios have worked. 0 versus 0 being 28.4, up to the 32.8, and then up to the 53.7. Does make a little bit of sense there. So now let's actually go up against some of the typings that are going to be featured in the cup here, starting off with our bug type. So as you can see right here at the top, we do have Ariados, Dustox, Heracross, Beedrill, Venomoth, Anorith, Pineco, all as flat out wins for us, but there's kind of a theme there. Ariados, Dustox, Heracross, Beedrill, Venomoth, all those are pretty weak to psychic type damage, which, okay, makes a little bit of sense. Once we get past those though, you can see Beautifly, Ninjask, Yanma, Masquerain. Basically all the other bugs that aren't going to have a weakness to our psychic type damage still can end up beating us. And one of the things that I found interesting is even though we have Thunderbolt, even though Thunderbolt is going to be good up against the types that carry flying as well, it still doesn't really get through to a lot of these. Like if you look at Scyther, Yanmega, I mean even Yanma, I mean all of these, Vespiquen, it just doesn't penetrate well enough to actually warrant a win here, which is quite interesting. So it does seem like the problem is basically that we can only get one shot at getting a Thunderbolt. So even though we do have a hard-hitting Psychic type move as our fast move, it's not quite fast enough to really put on the shield pressure like we could with a different Electric type move, possibly if we carried one. But so as you can see with the bug types, we do get through to a lot of the poison types, but outside of that, we're not too great here. Moving on to our Electric types, we do have here at the very top Zapdos, Ampharos, Manectric, Electivire, Geodude, Electabuzz, Flaffy, Jolteon, and then Graveler finishing it off for our clear wins there. We do have a tie up against a couple of these, Chinchou, Electrode, and Lantern. And then after that we just start to lose. You can see the Golem is actually a loss. Interestingly, Golem is a loss, but Graveler is a win. Okay, I would have thought that it'd have been the other way considering that Golem has less bulk than Graveler, but Golem can just output a lot more damage in that scenario. So then you can see Plusle, let's see, some Raichu action, Magneton, Magnezone, and Alolan Raichu actually bringing it up down there at the bottom. So the Electric typing is yet again kind of awkward. The ones that we win against are kind of just the ones that Confusion can kind of break through a little bit and just do an insane amount of damage right out of the gate. If there's any way for the Pokemon to basically have even, if the Pokemon can even match our damage output in any way, shape, or form, it pretty much still ends up beating us. So we're basically winning against the things that aren't extremely stat driven. Their stat product isn't super high in the Great League. And I mean, out of these wins, the only like super notable one is probably Graveler. So I would say the Electric types are pretty rough. Next, moving on to the Grass typing here, we do have some notable ones up at the top already. Ivysaur, Venusaur, Breloom, Snover, Oddish, you know, whatever. Victreebel, Vileplume, Roserade is a tie. So our ties here, Gloom, Roserade, Turtwig, and Weepinbell. Turtwig's the interesting one there, but okay. Roserade, Gloom, and Weepinbell all being ties. Okay, I can get behind that. Then towards down the bottom here, you can see we do have Tangrowth, Exeggutor, Leafeon, Sceptile. Let's see, at the very bottom we do have Shiftry, Nuzleaf, Cacturne. That's okay. I mean, they're dark typing as well, so I get why they're there. It's just that they're not super relevant in this cup, and I doubt a lot of people are going to be actually using those, but those are really good counters up against our Psychic typing here. So Bayleaf, Parasect, Sunflora, Torterra are the grass types that probably are a tiny bit more relevant. Not really. They're actually, Bayleaf probably the most relevant out of those four. But I mean, the grass types are pretty weird. And honestly, the biggest thing with the grass types is here again, we do get through to some of the poisons, but outside of the Pokemon that carry the poison typing as well, we just kind of fall apart. We don't really have like, I mean, look, so outside of the ones that carry poison, Alolan Exeggutor, Carnivine beats us, Tangela beats us, Grovyle beats us, Lombre beats us, Credilli beats us, Sceptile beats us. I mean, it's just, there's some really awkward matchups in the grass typing. And unfortunately, a lot of the ones that we win against, the only reason that we win is because we have that super effective damage to the poison typing. Once you strip that away, all of the other grass types seem to do fairly well up against us. So, kind of still awkward, kind of similar to the bug type. Last but not least, moving on to the normal types here. So, right here at the top, Staravia, Slacking, Lickitung, Chatot, Staraptor, Teddiursa, Ursaring, Fearow, and Tauros. Okay, I mean, you see some flyers in there, which is kind of important. Once we get down into some ties, we do have Dodrio, ourselves, of course, Linoone, Lopunny, Porygon, and Snorlax are all ties. If we go all the way down to the bottom, you can see Alolan Raticate is actually going to be a pretty big boy here, which does make some sense utilizing like Bite and Crunch. It can actually break through a lot of our Psychic typing and do quite a bit of super effective damage there. Dunsparce, okay, Dunsparce does have access to Lick if I'm not mistaken. No, it's Bite. So it does have access to Bite, which does do a fair bit amount of damage. It also has access to Astonish, but you know, Bite definitely going to be outputting a ton of damage here. Dunsparce is such a weird one. So crazy. Anyways, down here at the very bottom though, you can see that we also do have Knocked Out, Vigoroth, even Miltank making an appearance here at the very bottom. So with the normal typings, it seems like Thunderbolt can kind of get into some of the flying type area, but other than that, we really just beat things that have less stat product than we do. We generally are going to lose to some of the things that just have better stats, and outside of that, we just kind of beat the things that have worse stats. So I wouldn't really say the normal typing is a really clear win. Honestly, none of these typings were great in terms of like our matchup spread here. We still do really rough against most of these typings, which is a hard sell for Girafarig here. So now let's actually go over some of the meta relevant Pokemon. We're actually going to start with some shields here. All of these simulations are run up against the entire Jungle Cup meta, which is defined on PvPoke. It's 22 separate Pokemon. Starting with our 0 vs 0, we do have a 27.3%, which is pretty much in line with our 0 vs 0 up against the entire cup. Next, we do move on to the 1 vs 0. So in the meta, in an actual tournament scenario, I don't see too many people actually using both shields on one Pokemon, so therefore we kind of strip away one of those shields. We just do a 1 vs 0 and a 0 vs 1 here. In that 1 vs 0 though, we do actually end up with an 86.4. Next we move on to the 0 vs 1, which is actually a 9.1%, so we're actually faring better up against the meta rather than the entire cup. And in our last shield scenario, we do have the 1 vs 1, which is a 36.4. Compared to the entire cup shields, it does increase when we do have more shields, but it's still not looking too hot. I mean, 36.4% of the meta is only going to be, what, like 6 or 7 Pokemon? It's not going to be too many. So let's actually jump into those matchups here on PvPoke. You can see we do have multi-battle up there at the top again. We do have Girafarig, Confusion Psychic, Thunderbolt, just like before. We do have our custom group this time, quick filled with the Jungle Cup meta. Give both myself and the opponent 1 shield each. Once we hit battle, you can see we do have 8 wins at 36.4. And looking at these wins here, you can see we do have Venomoth, Venusaur, Beedrill, Breloom, Heracross, Masquerain, Victreebel, and then the Alolan Graveler showing up there again. Then we do have some ties with Ivysaur and Lantern. Then moving into the losses, we do have Golem, Scyther, Pidgeot, Raichu, Magneton, Cradily, Magnezone, Vespiquen, Vigoroth, Knocked Out, Scizor, and Fortress. So, up against the entire cup, as you can see, it's kind of a very similar scenario. If they're going to be weak to the confusion type damage, then they're pretty much going to have a problem with us. If they're not weak to that confusion type damage, then they don't have as much of a problem with us. Ivysaur is kind of the weird one here because if you remember in the entire cup scenario, Ivysaur actually showed up at the top. So basically, if you have Razor Leaf, you can actually do a lot better up against Girafarig versus if you have Vine Whip. And that goes for a lot of the Pokemon here. So as you can see, Vine Whip really is just making it so much harder for Ivysaur to break through here. But it basically goes that way for a lot of the other Pokemon as well. Victreebel, as you can see, utilizing Razor Leaf, I'm pretty sure Victreebel just has, what, Acid? Yeah, so this one's not as, like, easily visible, but I mean, as you can see, Acid just performs so much worse. So the problem with Confusion hitting these poison types for super effective damage is that the poison types need to have something to hit back Girafarig with a ton of damage as well, and Razor Leaf is generally the best option to go with there. But I feel like Razor Leaf really hinders you in a lot of scenarios using either Ivysaur or Venusaur. I personally think that Ivysaur and Venusaur are more focused on their charge moves. Something like Victreebel does a lot better up against the Girafarig in this scenario because Victreebel can rely more on Razor Leaf in not only that matchup, but in most of its matchups it relies on Razor Leaf as well. Whereas Ivysaur, Venusaur, kind of like, it's up in the air. Some people like Razor Leaf, some people like Vine Whip. It's just completely up to you, but just know that up against Girafarig, Razor Leaf definitely performs way better than Vine Whip will in a lot of scenarios. Another thing that I also found interesting in here is that the one thing that I really thought Girafarig would have a good grip on would be the Vigoroth matchup. I thought that possibly it would have a better footing in a lot of scenarios, considering that we don't take super effective damage from the counter anymore. We only take a normal neutral type damage. But even then, Vigoroth still can power through really hard, and it still ends up beating us. We don't have that great of matchups up against Vigoroth. It still ends up kind of being lackluster. And then you can see Knocked Out is even in that same scenario. I mean, I guess in some scenarios, if you're able to just whip out the Thunderbolt up against a Knocked Out and they don't catch it or they don't have shields, possibly it's a very good situation to be in there, but that's extremely situational, and I don't know how often you're actually going to be put in that situation. So all in all, I'm not sold on Girafarig personally. I think situationally it could do okay. I think situationally it could have some interesting matchups. I think that situationally, up against certain team compositions, the poison typings will have a really hard time going up against the Girafarig. But outside of that, I'm not really sold on it. It's got really low numbers in a lot of areas. I mean, just as like a pure generalist, it's really, really lackluster. It's definitely an extreme specialist, and that specialty is super situational. So I'm definitely not sold on it, but let me know what you think about Girafarig down below. Of course, we do have what's coming up next in our deep dives, and hopefully the way that I've tied in the gameplay to this video, gameplay was provided from the Discord server. If you're interested in joining that, definitely hop down below, but you'll hear about that in the next little ending bit. Okay. Well, you've made it to the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. Thank you so much for watching. Of course, if you do have any ideas for content, please drop them down in the comments below. I'll be happy to look at those for you guys. Of course, if you want to join my personal Discord, get to talking to some people that have a similar outlook as myself, definitely go down into the description, join that Discord there. If you want to become a Patreon, there is a link down in the description for that as well. My outlook on Patreon is I don't want to put anything behind a paywall. This is what I do. You guys get every bit of what I make, and I don't want to limit that to someone else just because they can't pay for something. I didn't think that was fair. If you want to be a Patreon, just know that you're literally doing it from the kindness of your heart, wanting to support me, and I appreciate that. You don't even understand how much. There are a couple of other options if you would like to join the community here on YouTube. It's very similar to a Twitch-like subscription where it's a dollar amount per month depending on where you live, and then that monthly fee basically gets funneled to me every month, and you do get a couple of special perks here on YouTube, like some badges and some emojis or whatever. I honestly think those are only for live streaming, so that may not be the way that most people want to go, but that's an option if you want to. Other than that, if you'd like to follow me on Twitter, that link is actually going to be down in the description as well. And until our next video, guys, that should be it. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out, and until our next video, I will catch you then.